Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. Today, I want to tell you a Medal of Honor story. And to get there, we need to go to July 22nd, 1864 at Atlanta. That afternoon, a massive assault by Major General Frank Cheatham's Confederate forces, an entire corps of men, tore into the Union's Western Front. The attack landed squarely on two of the Union Corps, the 17th and 15th. The day was oppressively hot, steaming, humid, sun beating down on the men. Temperatures and tempers soon reached the boiling point as the officers and men, most of whom had shed their coats and trappings in the summer heat, scrambled to meet the moment when the Confederate soldiers came seemingly out of nowhere. Gun smoke from the rising din of musket fire and the rhythmic thump of artillery shells obscured visibility, the smoke drifting, making everything hard to see. The U.S. soldiers, under fire in the trenches, wondered from which direction the enemy had advanced. So bad were the drifts of smoke and just the confusion and chaos of battle, the echoes of all the sounds. Pretty soon, rumors spread down one section of the Union line under attack that the Confederates had taken or were firing from nearby Bald Hill, a rather prominent part of this sector of the battlefield. And there was more concern that the bullets and shells shrieking around them came from Union men who were firing at the Confederates that had taken Bald Hill. Nowadays, we would call that friendly fire. And of course, it's nothing but friendly. That moment in time and what happened after that, a story connected to it, is told by an artilleryman. Long after the war, he told a gathering of veterans this story that circulated among the boys in blue in the trenches, this rumor and what came of it. That artilleryman was an officer, First Lieutenant Richard Stanley Tuthill of the 1st Michigan Light Artillery. He explained to the audience that a beloved and much admired senior officer, a brigadier general named Manning Ferguson Force, and he's pictured right here, Manning Ferguson Force. Well, in the din of battle, amidst the screams, the yelling, the battle smoke, the gunfire, the artillery fire, Force called for a flag to make it clear that, in fact, there were Union troops here, and the Union troops were not to be fired at if they were being fired at all from friendly forces. A young subordinate of Force's scrambled, thinking the situation was hopeless, and he went to find a white handkerchief, a towel, or a shirt for the general to wave and surrender because that's what he thought Force wanted. Force saw what was going on, probably saw the lieutenant coming at him with a scrap of white linen, and Force yelled the immortal words, "Damn you, sir. I don't want a flag of truce. I want the American flag." Tuthill continues with the story. He said, quote, "A flag, an American flag, stars and stripes, was soon obtained and planted upon the highest point in our earthworks, and there it remained." End quote. So Manning Force, wanted to keep everyone together and needed to rally the men. And this is the kind of courage that you find in senior officers in those moments of peril. They have to meet that moment. And not all generals do. Some act differently, but not Force. He wanted the American flag. He intended to stand his ground, to calm the men's nerves, to rally everyone around, and to make sure that they were prepared for the onslaught of Frank Cheatham's Confederate forces that were soon to be upon them. There were attacks, there were counterattacks. At the end of the day, the Union forces won. Those of you who are students of Civil War history know the outcome of the Battle of Atlanta. Somewhere in the melee, in the fray of battle, General Force was struck down by a mini ball. And according to Tuthill, he says the ball entered at the lower corner of Manning's eye, passed through his head, and came out near the base of his brain. The blood gushed from his eyes, nose, and mouth, Tuthill said, but he uttered no moan, not a word of complaint. The bones of his mouth were shattered, and he could not, in fact, speak. But from his eyes flashed a spirit unconquered and unconquerable, the spirit of a soldier who was fearless and above reproach. Now, Tuthill also told his listeners that the normally quiet and mild-mannered Force may not have actually spoken the words, the "damn you, sir, I don't want a flag of truce, I want the American flag." He might not have exactly said those words, but as often happens in the Civil War, in those difficult moments when generals are barking, yelling commands, and everything is in chaos, that words are heard and later interpreted as best they could. And the retelling of stories, of course, is also a contributing factor. Tuthill admits that. But there can be no doubt of Force's courage and his gallantry, and that's evidenced by his receipt of the Medal of Honor. He got that medal for Atlanta, and it was given to him in 1892. And according to the citation, it says, quote, "Brigadier General Force charged upon the enemy's works, and after their capture defended his position against assaults of the enemy until he was severely wounded." In fact, Force's face injuries were not quite as severe as Tuthill believed. Certainly, they looked bad, but the general actually returned to his command, his brigade, by October of 1864, participated in the March to the Sea with Major General William T. Sherman, and afterwards received a brevet promotion to Major General for the Battle of Atlanta and his courage. So not only did he receive the Medal of Honor, he also received that honorary brevet for his courage. Now, in peacetime, after the war, Harvard educated before the war, Force settled in Cincinnati, actually had settled there before the war. He returns to Cincinnati, and he went on to serve in the county's judicial system. Perhaps one of the highest honors he had was being appointed the commandant of the Ohio Soldiers and Sailors Home. That was in 1888, and he served there until his death in 1889 at age 74. Now, before I conclude this, I want to talk just for a moment about this photograph of him, which I believe dates to about June of 1865, because the photograph was taken in Louisville, Kentucky, and it was taken after he had received his promotion to Major General. And you can see the 2 stars on his shoulder, which is the appropriate rank for a Major General. Also notice that the shoulder strap, the insignia, it's only the 2 stars. It's missing that gold embroidery that you normally find around shoulder straps. That's known as a subdued rank, and it was worn by many a general officer towards the end of the war, because there was fears that they might become the targets of sharpshooters, and did everything they could to avoid being shot down. And one of the ways of doing that was to make the insignia that you wore a little less pronounced, hence the subdued rank. Nowadays, you might liken it to a form of camouflage. Also notice on his hat, you'll see what appears to be a brass or some sort of metal arrow. Well, that's the Corps badge of the 17th Corps. So there you have it, the story of Manning Ferguson Force, Medal of Honor recipient for the Battle of Atlanta. Thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail.